I want you to close your eyes and imagine. Imagine a world where no sound has ever been recorded. No gramophone records, no CDs, no tapes, iTunes or iPods, no radios, no television, no movies, and certainly no recordings of choirs. Now imagine the only way to hear music is to hear it live, with that sound only existing for as long as the notes hang in the air. Now you can open your eyes. It's almost unimaginable to think of a world without recorded sounds. So let's look at how the unimaginable became reality. In 1877, the history books tell us that Thomas Edison invented a device to record sound on tin foil. And here is the machine. It was tested for the first time on the 12th of August, with Edison reciting the edifying text of Mary Had a Little Lamb. And to his amazement, the machine played back his words. He filed a patent and is duly credited with the invention of recorded sound. Now, the original recording disintegrated after a couple of plays, but many years later, for the sake of posterity, Edison recorded those famous words again. And here they are.
The first words I spoke in the original phonograph. A little piece of practical poetry. Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow, and everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go.
Like so much in the history books, this, however, was only half the story. In fact, Edison was pipped to the post by a full 20 years by a Frenchman called Léon Scott de Martinville, who invented the world's first machine to record sound. Patented on the 25th of March, 1857, it was called a phonograph and recorded the sound onto long, thin strips of paper which had been blackened with smoke. However, and rather importantly you might think, the one thing this machine couldn't do was to play back the recording. Very probably the reason why history is silent, excuse the pun, on the phonograph. Until 2008, that is. For in that year, in the Paris National Archives, one of these smoke-blackened strips of paper was discovered and played back with some very clever computer technology. This truly momentous discovery is of Martinville himself, singing the first line of Au clair de lune. So here it is, the first ever recording of sound in the world. So, back to 1877 and Edison's phonograph. To say he recreated the sound of his own voice is perhaps a touch generous. The results were barely audible, the tinfoil lasted only a couple of plays, and the rendering of Mary Had a Little Lamb was hardly auspicious, but it was a beginning. Then, in keeping with Edison's mercurial personality, he lost interest in the phonograph for the next 10 years. He had other inventing to do. Early in 1887, Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone, and who also was working on a phonograph, approached Edison to discuss collaboration, but Edison refused, and in October of the same year formed the Edison Phonograph Company, and work resumed in earnest on the machine. This historic photograph was taken on the 16th of June 1888, when Edison and his team completed the perfected phonograph, after a final push of 72 hours continuous work. On the 14th of August 1888, the Edison perfected phonograph was demonstrated at a press conference in London. A recording of Sullivan's Lost Chord was used to demonstrate the machine, and the actual cylinder has survived. phonograph came of age in 1901, when a method for mass-producing the cylinders was invented. Until then, if, say, 50 cylinders by a particular artist had to be recorded on that day, then the poor unfortunate artist had to record the performance 50 times over. But now, mass production using a mould and gold electrodes were possible. These new cylinders were given the rather grand, but factually correct name of Edison gold moulded records. The machines themselves also had a makeover, with a range of elegant mahogany cases, complete with brass or painted horns. Or you could choose from one of the new cabinet models, or if you really wanted to outdo the neighbours, then a floor-standing model sculpted in cement from the Edison cement works. Well, where else would it come from? Which would have them green with envy. Edison wasn't the only company making phonographs and recording cylinders, and there was intense rivalry, aggressive marketing, and all sorts of dirty tricks carried out by the various recording companies, even to the extent of having an employee working for a rival company, whose job it was to subtly scratch and crack the recording cylinders before they were packed. Edison was a particularly astute businessman who understood all about mass marketing. Colourful posters showed happy, smiling children, and even Indian braves enjoying the delights of a phonograph. Political correctness wasn't quite in vogue in those days. But despite all the improvements and all the marketing, the days of the phonograph were numbered due to its fundamental flaw. The average cylinder played for only 2 minutes. A gentleman called Emil Berliner now enters the story. He was a German-born American and had been working on a machine that used a flat circular disc. This, of course, was much easier to store, but crucially would play longer and would play louder. He patented his gramophone on the 8th of November 1887. 25 years later, production of phonographs and cylinders had ceased. Berliner, like Edison, used his own voice to test his machine, and that actual gramophone record still survives. Here it is, reciting Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Oh, such lack of imagination.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. When the blazing sun is gone, when he nothing shines upon, then you show your little light, twinkle, twinkle all the night.
Berliner was also an astute businessman and formed 3 separate companies to record, manufacture, and sell the gramophones and their records. They were the Gramophone Company in the UK, affectionately known as his master's voice and later to become EMI, Deutsche Grammophon in Germany, and the Victor Talking Machine in the USA, later to become RCA Victor. All 3 have become multinational companies. This photograph shows the very first recording studio of the Gramophone Company, opened in 1898 and located in the basement of the Coburn Hotel in London. The very first records were mostly orchestral, brass bands or little vocal ditties, and they were recorded acoustically with the performer standing in front of a huge metal horn down which travelled the sound to a vibrating stylus, cutting directly into a wax master disc. No microphones as yet, and all recordings were done in the studio, as it was well nigh impossible to move the equipment. So here is one of the very first gramophone records produced in England from this very studio and issued a few weeks after its opening. This wonderful photo from the 1900s shows an acoustic recording session in progress. Notice the recording horn is feeding into a separate room, which housed the equipment and the recording engineers. How very high-tech. If you would like to know more, then go to the Acoustic Records page of the 78 RPM Records section on the website, where you can watch some fascinating archive film of early recordings being made. The record companies are ready to record, the new studios have been fitted out, the equipment is in place, and the scene is now set for the first English choir to make its debut in front of the recording horn on the 12th of October 1902.